Hey there, it's Debbie, and I have my friend on the show today. You may have heard of her, Cynthia Thurlow. And she is obviously a superstar, well known and making an impact in the world. And today I wanted her to come back on the show. I'm going to ask her different questions on health, supplements, fasting, and nutrition for athletes as we are focusing on how to be fit and healthy endurance athlete from the inside out. But what can we do to improve fat loss, performance, and longevity is what I keep talking about. Also, the Goldilocks effect, variation for everything. Not too much, not too little, just that right amount, that right dose for you to create that positive benefit. And then there's supplementation. What do we need? What do we not need? Ideally, we run functional lab testing, but that can cost a lot of money. So you can experiment one supplement at a time, figure out what the dosage is, what the best time of day is to take it. What is it even for? Do you need it? And then the pulse method that you kind of take it in, take that supplement, and then maybe you're feeling better, you don't need it, and listening to your body, kind of that intuition we want to discover and pay attention to. So what we're talking today a little bit more about the creatine and how is it beneficial for athletes? When should we take it? I always want to know why. And another product she started getting into, Inositol. And as a advocate for coaching the whole you and improving our lifestyle and working on improving our future self, the holistic method I created 10 years ago, because as a personal trainer, I couldn't just help people get healthy, training them a couple times a week. There's so much more we want to work on, and it can be overwhelming, but just focusing on your priorities and setting action items. So we're not trying to do all this at once, but want to work on, of course, nutrition and exercise type, duration, frequency, intensity, heart zones. We were talking about a lot lately. Nutrition is, what we eat, when we eat, why, how, where. But then there's other factors, of course, stress management, I talk about all the time. Sleep, prioritizing sleep is also how you start your day and how you end your day. And then movement throughout the day. Even if I lifted weights and did a run this morning, am I going to sit the rest of the day? Movement throughout the day, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And then we want to work on gut health, proper digestion, what supplements we need, maybe gut reset, and more for improving our health from the inside out, always working on the gut. Happiness is a big one. Gratitude, setting positive mind, positive attitude, positive energy. And then, of course, hydration, getting your minerals tested, each TMA test I just did earlier this year. I need to retest. You have to cut some of your hair with your hairdresser, let them do that in a secret spot back there, no one can tell, and find out your minerals if they're in balance. But doing the right mineral balancing, as with LMNT, you get a free bonus pack when you make your next order. LMNT is great. I like the unsweetened, but you can test out the different flavors. If you use our code low carb athlete, you can get their sample pack. So minerals is essential for proper hydration, those electrolytes, because we don't sweat out water, we sweat out minerals. So replenishing your body as an athlete is really important to get the right amount of minerals, but also testing and not guessing. All of this is an important part. And that's what I do, is health coaching for athletes now. But today I want to talk to Cynthia about the creatine, but also her thoughts on what I've been diving into a lot is fasting too much for athletes and the female athlete. And are we eating enough, getting that protein? Cynthia and I just both have always agreed with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, looking at getting that 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight, getting that protein in the 30, 50 grams, but also looking at what Dr. Stacy Sims is saying, prioritizing protein for the female and male athlete is important, but females getting that post 30 to 45-minute workout window in there is that magic window to refuel with that protein in it and some carbs if you did a more higher intensity workout. Timing your nutrition is really important. And I think we kind of go back to listening to everyone fasting too much. I did that in the beginning. I think I did too much OMAD, your fat adapted. metabolically flexible, but you're not hungry, you're full, you're satiated because you are eating more protein and fat. And then we hear carbs are bad. And then we think, oh, I can't eat that as a carbohydrate. So we don't have berries. We don't have a banana. We don't have any potatoes. So then we feel guilty if we have any carbs. It's about what type of carbs and when to have them. So post-workout, evening meal, if I'm going to do a morning workout, that's more anaerobic, interval training, burning a little more muscle glycogen. So here's Cynthia. I'll stop talking. You can listen to her. All right, guys, I've got Cynthia Thurlow back on the show to talk shop and to talk about what's new in her world. And we talked to you last, Cynthia, about your book. How's that been going? And
been doing really well. I'm getting ready to probably later this year do a second book proposal. It will not be focused on fasting, although I'm grateful for all the women and men that have bought the book and certainly support and appreciate your support and your followers' support. But I like to think big picture. And so intermittent fasting is one of many things we can do to support our health, but not the only thing.
Yeah. So what's your main goal? Do you think it's just to help people's aging process, enhance our future selves?
I mean, I think a lot of it is metabolic health, which encompasses a lot of different things. And then on top of that, being very strategic about nutrition and very strategic about supplementation. I'm very research-based. And obviously, a lot of women in our age range really struggle with managing their stress and sleeping and managing energy. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing at this point is really helping women understand how to go about doing that. How can we hack it? I mean, I don't necessarily love that word, but how do we continue to, aging is a blessing, right? The whole getting older part, but to do it in a way that feels authentic. And that might be very different for all of us. But for me, I want to have lots of energy, get really high quality sleep, make good food choices, and be able to navigate a very active lifestyle. I would not coin myself as an athlete, but I am athletic. And so I think it's important to find the strategies that make you feel good and really, embrace those and not be afraid to advocate for yourself. Because I'm now at a stage where I have teenagers. And so I can be a little more selfish. I'm going to put that in air quotes, selfish with self-care. But those are the things that allow me to show up and to serve others and reach lots of people and share my message. So that's a little bit of like where the focus is going. But as we were saying before we started recording, I always say intermittent fasting picked me. I'd always been an advocate of it. However, that's probably what most people know me about. But my experiences and my focus are far beyond just the myopic view of just fasting for women.
Well, I know I met you originally at Nutritional Therapy Conference when we had conferences for NTA.
Yep.
And I think it is same as yourself. I have called the holistic method. You have your holistic blueprint, and it's looking at the whole person, the whole individual, that it's not just, there's different tools to enhancing the aging process and being your best self and showing up to life every day, feeling energetic and thriving. And it's not just fasting. That's one different type of variation of something you can add in there to enhance the journey of life.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of people that some things are really tangible and they're easy for them to do. Like I would imagine your community, they're avid exercisers. That's exercise is probably breathing. I would say it's probably pretty mixed with my people. I think most of my community they enjoy exercising. They look forward to it. They don't fear it. But there's also a subset of people that, they've really been missed by the traditional allopathic medical model, and fasting for many of them is a panacea for insulin resistance and high blood pressure and terrible lipids and PCOS and fertility issues. And that doesn't just plague younger women. That can, influence the way that we transition from perimenopause into menopause. And on a lot of different levels, I think the whole kind of chronic medical model way that we view disease in the United States is really short-sighted. And so I prefer, widgeting out things. That the lifestyle as medicine to me is much more interesting than just prescribing medications. And frankly, that's why I left clinical cardiology, because I was writing hundreds and hundreds of prescriptions a week for many things that could have been fixed with changing lifestyle, but no one wanted to listen to me at that time. Now everyone thinks, oh gosh, you were so ahead of the curve. But no, not really. I was just leaning into what seemed to be something that made a lot more sense than just writing more pharmaceutical agents to address lifestyle problems.
Yeah, I really see that as more so as my dad passed away last year at 80, and seeing all my mom friends when I go visit them in Palm Desert, like, God, everyone is dependent on the doctor's recommendation and has nothing to do with nutrition and lifestyle. It's all to what pharmaceutical drugs. So that's another topic I can get on venting. But today I want to talk to you about what you've learned working with your huge tribe. But what I'm finding, I told you earlier that I'm getting more of the people that listen to the show are driven, high performing, high charging individuals, athletes of all levels, but they're so type A, triple A's myself that we take something that we hear is good for us and we do it to the extreme, and they do everything. And I'm finding, a lot of the clients I'm getting more and more from around the world, it's super exciting, but they're doing 100-mile races, or they're doing half Ironmans, and they're trying the 5-1-1 fasting plan, and they're trying OMAD. And I did all this myself. Gosh, I was trying to remember when fasting started, 2015, or when the book started coming out. But for me, I was, I'm working out 2-3 times a day. Some days I used to own a fitness studio for 10 years. So I was teaching classes and working out on top of that. And I think what happened to me, I'm trying to share the story that I got obviously the burnout and breakdown, but then I started doing the fasting. And then you get that low energy availability, not eating enough. And then we've been talking both about the protein, prioritizing protein first and putting that all in. So I'm finding a lot of people, athletes, men and women, are not eating enough because now we started getting into fasting, but we're burning off so much exercising, but people still struggle to lose weight because of various reasons and improve performance. So I always look at what's your why, what's your purpose, and figure out that personalized training and coaching plan for athletes. But what are your thoughts on that? So I know it's like 1% of the country works out.
Right. But I think it's such an important question. And I'm so grateful that you are advocating for your community. This is something that Brad Kearns and I've recently talked about. Brad and I are buddies. And I'm going to stick my neck out here and say that if you are a very thin, active person, you are in a different category. And then you take that thin, active person and you're an athlete. And let's be clear, you're doing triathlons and Ironmans and really tough conditioning workouts and lengthy endurance sports. It's like adding gasoline to a fire. Mm-hmm. I call it the triad, and Brad and I have kind of talked about this, so he can attest the fact that I've been saying this for months. It's the over fasting, over restricting, over exercising female. Yep. And I do think it starts with good intentions. I do fervently believe that it starts with, if a little bit of fasting is good, more is better. If a little bit of exercise is good, more is better. And what I find is that these are the women who come to me and their adrenals are thrashed. And let me just back up and say, I've kind of made a niche in the community of perimenopause and menopause. The game changes, ladies. It does not mean you cannot be active. It does not mean that you stop doing your sport, but you don't recover as easily. You are less stress resilient. Not only do you go through menopause, you go through adrenal pause. Mm-hmm. And so you cannot handle all that stress. And it's not that you are not capable. Your body just isn't as stress resilient. So let's talk about the average woman in perimenopause. It's a slippery slope and you don't realize it's even happening. It happened to me. I did a whole first TEDx on it. As embarrassing as it was, I was so embarrassed to talk about perimenopause. It was like, now I laugh about it. It's what I talk about every day. But as we are kind of transitioning in our late 30s, early 40s, you can't do the not sleeping enough. You can't do these really strenuous fasted workouts and think you can go to a stressful job and you're just not eating enough. You're going really low carb. You're not eating enough food. Your body is screaming for nourishment. These are outliers. These are not the average American that is metabolically unhealthy and obese and insulin resistant. It's a very different type of patient. And so I'm glad that there are people out there that are starting to ask the questions, are we offering the best and most important information? Are we offering it up to these very athletically conditioned individuals? That doesn't mean that you never fast. That doesn't mean, Debbie, when you're not in a peak training program, that you can't have a 16-hour fast. That is not what I'm saying. You must fast for your cycle, understanding that at the beginning of your cycle in the follicular phase, you can get away with more intense training. It does mean in the second half of your cycle, you should not be doing as much strenuous and intense types of workouts, and certainly not doing these prolonged fasts. And this is oftentimes when people will say to me, oh gosh, I'm like struggling. There should be no white knuckling it through lifestyle modifications. There should be no white knuckling it through fasting. So understanding that fasting is a form of hormesis, so beneficial stress in the right amount at the right time. And just like exercises, just like cryotherapy or cold exposure, just like heat exposure, just like high intensity interval training, these are great strategies, but they're not to be implemented like you're lighting a fire and you're throwing gasoline on top of it. And that's what I see is emerging, is that a lot of the pushback that we're seeing about fasting in women is out of the desire to explain to women there's a season and a reason for everything in our lives, right? If you're 25 years old, you're very lean, you are a competitive athlete, maybe you played D1 sports, maybe you were pre-Olympic, or Olympic trials kind of level athlete. That is very different than a sedentary 35-year-old woman with insulin resistance and PCOS, and is not someone who's exercising.
Yeah.
In that instance, in the latter, that individual could really benefit from a bit of intermittent fasting, a bit of lower carb diets. And so I think we have to be very conscientious about the recommendations we're making, and understanding that fasting does not per se apply to every single person. I have women who are not athletes and don't do well with fasting, and that's okay. I think they feel broken because, what everyone's talking about is being new and novel, which fasting, unfortunately, is not new or novel. It dates back to biblical times. But I think when we're speaking about fasting in that context, they're like, everyone else is doing it. Why isn't it working for me? And I always say, well, maybe you don't have good blood sugar regulation. Maybe it's where you are in your menstrual cycle. Maybe it's you just went through a divorce and your adrenals are thrashed and your body desperately needs you to have 3 meals a day and a 12-hour feeding window. And that's okay. There's no shame in that. So I think it's important just to make sure as a middle-aged woman and as a clinician to be saying to your community, it's okay if fasting doesn't work for you right now. It's a season and a reason. Maybe when you are no longer working out as intensely. And I know for anyone who's been an athlete their entire lives, they don't even like processing that information, but just say for argument's sake, maybe when you hit 55, you've got a knee injury and you're not as active as you had been before. And that's okay. There's no shame in that. Maybe you're doing more endurance work in the pool. Maybe you're swimming because it's easier on your joints. Maybe that's the time to consider, or maybe that's the time to think about it. Or you go to your doctor's office and you're a perimenopausal, menopausal female, and you're starting to see a creep in some of your fasting insulin, your A1C, and your fasting glucose, and your inflammatory markers are up. And as they're taking time to kind of figure out why that's happening, maybe then fasting is a good thing. But I don't think fasting is right for everyone. The other piece that I would say is there are definitely people who don't feel good when they work out in a fasted state. I'm not one of them. I've never been someone who likes to have food jostling around in my stomach. I just don't feel good.
Yeah.
I've always been that way my entire life. But there are people who need like a handful of berries and maybe they need some turkey breast, and then that's going to allow them to get through their workout. Again, no shame. And unfortunately, with the triad, as I've seen it evolve, it's like people just, the high achievers, they're like, more is better, more fasting is better, less food is better. And I'm here to tell you, don't want to break your metabolism. And although technically our metabolism does not really shift until we're 60 years old as individuals, I do see in perimenopause and menopause, a lot of women, as they're losing muscle mass and it's being replaced with adipose tissue, they start losing some degree of metabolic flexibility. They start getting fluctuations in sex hormones and can make it a whole lot harder to maintain body composition, weight, etc. And you don't want to end up, being someone who has to reverse diet. And I'm not an expert in this area, but there are plenty of people I've worked with where they've whittled themselves down to 1,000 calories a day, and they'll say to me, I'm not hungry. And I'm like, well, okay, you had, a meal and a half and you're a 50-year-old, very active person, what do you think's happening? Your body is going to hold on to everything because it thinks you're starving.
Yeah.
And so having to kind of re-engineer meals to get them back up to eating 2 meals a day, maybe a third. And if you talk to anyone in our communities, the really active people, I'm thinking about Keto Savage. We were having like a sidebar conversation about this recently. And he said, I see a lot of middle-aged women who don't eat enough food. And I said, I see it too, but you see it from a different angle. I see it from the angle of you are going to break your metabolism and how that actually becomes an issue. They'll say, they just keep eating less and less and less and exercising more and more and sleeping less and less. And it can have, potentially catastrophic effects on your hormones, not to mention your mental health, because you're trying to figure out a solution to a problem and you're actually making it worse.
Yeah. I know. So I'm excited. I don't know if you saw, I got Pinoy metabolic testing. I'm going to start some on my floor here, but it's a breath analyzer and measures your carb to fat. And also you can do exercise tests to figure out kind of, I'd say, the areas of opportunity, what you're missing. And so I think the resting test will be fascinating for people because you'll see, okay, here's what calories you need to take. And here's your carb fuel source, how much you're getting burning and how much fat you're burning at rest. And we can figure out that information. Then you put them on treadmill or bike or whatever they use to work out regularly and figure out their training zones, what they are, where your peak fat burning is, where your metabolic crossover point is, where your threshold is, and figure out those training zones. Because so many people train in the wrong zones or do too much here and not enough there. So then you can figure out, okay, here's your limiters, here's what you need to work on. But I think, testing and not guessing, we always say to figure out, okay, what does the Dutch test say? Do you struggle with a lot of stress? What's that doing to your hormones? Looking at the other labs, but putting this in there. So I think so many people thrive on more is better, and they override those feelings of fatigue and those red flags. And I know Brad Kearns came over to my house, gosh, when I wrote my book, 2015, I think he was in Seattle, and we did a video on that. So, I used to have all that energy, and it is like, okay, that started when I was 40. Is that correlate with this perimenopausal stuff that we're all now learning about? But that was 10 years ago, how much of our hormones change and how we can't tolerate the same stress level we did earlier in life. And so we can't fuel the same, fast the same, train the same. As we age, we need to adjust everything. But listening to your body and getting that more personalized approach, I think, is so essential, because everyone does what someone else does on social media or podcasts, and like, oh, I'm going to do that same thing.
Yeah. And it's interesting because people always want to see what I eat, which is fine. And then they want to be in the gym with me. And I think for me, the gym as an introvert is like my place. And like the last thing I want to do is have someone following me around with an iPhone. Like that is like my kind of safe haven.
Yeah.
But much to your point, what works for you may not work for me, may not work for someone else. And so I always say with caution, like I know for me, 3 strength training days a week. I like zone 2 cardio. I do fine. I do a lot of walking. I'm in a very hilly part of my state. So there's nothing flat in my neighborhood, but I know where I need to keep my heart rate in order to maintain zone 2. And then I do Pilates, but I don't do Pilates per se for strength training. I do it for flexibility work. And I said, that works for me, but for someone else, that might not be intense enough. Like the years when I was still in clinical medicine, in cardiology, I used to take really, really intense, like 5:30 a.m. classes. Like it makes me cringe when I think about this. 5:30 a.m. classes, there were conditioning classes that were like CrossFit. And then we would have we would do 2 days of like CrossFit like classes. And then I would spin 1 day a week because that was just fun. And my friends all did these classes. We saw each other. And when I hit that wall in perimenopause and I woke up one morning and it was like, not just one morning, it was like every morning I could barely get out of bed and I was too low carb. I wasn't sleeping enough. It was too intense exercise for me. And I admittedly played high school sports. I've been athletic my whole life, but I am not an athlete. Like I don't have the burning desire to work out to that level of intensity. I'm married to someone like that, so I understand what that intensity is like. But even for me, like the realization that I no longer have a desire to work out that hard in a fasted state and then go to work, like stress. It was like cumulative stress over time was too much. Yeah. Exactly. And so now I look at it and I work out intensely in the gym. I'm all about being efficient, but I don't have a desire. Like I can tell, and I'm sure you probably do too, when you've overdone it, When I feel like I need a nap in the afternoon after intense physical exercise, I'm like, oh, I might have overdone it. Not intentionally, but I'm like, okay, my body was like, nope, you're not going to do that again. So
Yeah.
I think it's important to understand it's not limitations per se, like we're not trying hard enough. I think we have to have that inner dialogue of positively and reframe. Like I'm at the stage of my life, I would rather get 2 more hours of sleep than get up and go to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning and like make myself sick. Cause I'm, when you want to vomit, like you push yourself so hard, those days are gone. I don't want to do that anymore. And there's no shame in that.
No, no shame. Well, I'm also laughing that I, had a fitness studio for 10 years and started classes at 5:30. But if you're the teacher, guess what time you have to get up? I'd be there at 5 a.m. to set up everything and get organized. And it's just a bad schedule. So with that, over the time you got into, I know we talked about protein and hitting your protein goals, because I think a lot of us the industry got so keto. It's like, we're bouncing back and forth, carbs, no fat. And then we went to paleo and then to keto, and then everyone's all fat, as much fat as you want. And then we were like, oh wait, what happened to protein? And then now it's carnivore, no carbs, no anything, no fat, the fats with the protein. But so now kind of where do you find the focus is now more like getting your fasting window based on what you need, based on where you are right now, but then getting that protein goal. And then I want to get into your supplements you started, creatine and Inositol, and the why behind all that. So what kind of brought you to where you are now?
Well, for full transparency for your listeners to know like where I have gone, I've been paleo-esque for 12 years. I put a autoimmune disorder into complete remission, going gluten-free. Then it, kind of moved on to grain-free. Then it moved on to dairy-free. That works for me. In 2019, I spent 13 days in the hospital. And when I came out, I had so much digestive distress. I will spare you the details, but I will just say I was full carnivore for 9 months. And I like meat, but I missed vegetables. So the space that I kind of exist in, I always say I'm lower carb. I'm not no carb. I'm not ketogenic. I think a lot of people assume I'm keto. I'm not. I think the most important macronutrient for women is protein. Eating at least 100 grams of protein a day, or as Dr. Gabrielle Lyon says, 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. So for me, that's 100 to 110 grams a day, which I can easily hit. I would say 99% of the time I do. I have some days if I'm really busy, I may not, and I just give myself grace. Now, in terms of me personally, I don't do well with fatty meat. I never have. I finally had to acknowledge that I don't do well. If you offer me a ribeye or a filet, I'm going to eat the filet. And it's because I just don't do well with heavy animal-based fats.
Do you feel sick or
I feel sick?
Yeah, me too.
And so of course I wanted to make sure I didn't have a bad gallbladder. And it's my physiology. So if you're someone that tolerates heavy animal-based fats, good for you. I'm not one of them. So I eat lean meat, lean poultry, lean fish. I do even salmon sometimes can kind of make me nauseous. So lean protein. And then I am metabolically flexible. So I kind of have started experimenting with more carbohydrates, obviously from fruits and vegetables. I do really well in that space. I'm a huge fan of like raspberries, and I can get away with a just green banana. I can get away with sweet potatoes and root vegetables. And the one thing that Brad and I have also talked about, and I just interject this because for full transparency, more of us are starting to talk about this. I actually sleep better with a little bit more discretionary carbohydrate. So if you're someone that's sensitive to a reduction in carbohydrates overall, and your sleep is compromised. And as a middle-aged person, my sleep is really important. Even if I have carbohydrate and protein with my first meal of the day, I still sleep a little bit better. So for me, I've been experimenting more with carbohydrates. I do well. The only carbohydrate I don't do well with is plantains, which is a crime because I love them. And the way that I was able to kind of determine my individual net benefits of certain types of carbs is with a glucometer or continuous glucose monitor. So if you're listening and you're like, oh, I'm interested in what you're saying, knowledge is power. And so definitely arming yourself with some type of objective way of looking at your blood sugar response to certain foods. So I'm a huge fan of vegetables. I love vegetables. I don't think I could ever be full carnivore again. I always say carnivore-ish because I probably eat more protein than I do anything else. But I do genuinely love vegetables. Like I really, really love vegetables in particular. So for me, that's kind of where I am. I would say lowish carb, anywhere from 50 to 100 grams of carbs a day, but I don't track anymore. That to me is really kind of tiresome. I know some people I love data, but that's just not the kind of data I want to track. But I know enough to know what my portions are. And one of the things that starts to happen with women as they're getting older is as we're losing estrogen, unless you're taking HRT, you can lose insulin sensitivity. And this is where I'll say to women, instead of having a cup of pasta, maybe you're having a quarter cup or a third of a cup. And so really being cognizant of processed carbs versus unprocessed carbs. I find most people do fine with some sweet potato because it's hard to overeat a sweet potato. I mean, there's enough fiber, it fills you up, right? As opposed to pasta and like rice and bread and gluten-free bread and things like that. So that's where I am right now. But what really got me interested in creatine monohydrate, which is one of the most well-researched supplements or ergogenic aids that's out there, was out of the N of one. I'm a thinner Caucasian woman, and I was having a harder time putting on muscle mass. And Gabrielle Lyon, who we all know, she and I were always kind of having conversations and going back and forth about do I supplement, do I get on testosterone therapy, do I not, what's the decision for me, because everything else is optimized. And once I started creatine monohydrate, I was able to start seeing gains in the gym. And you have to remember that creatine got a bad rap over 20 years ago because a lot of the gym bro science that was out there, and people were taking very high loading doses of creatine, and they were also using exogenous steroids, not the stuff that is FDA approved stuff, or the stuff that's compounded specifically to you. And so creatine was what allowed me over the past year to continue to go in the gym and go up on weight and intensity. As a side effect, as a benefit, really, it improved my sleep quality. It definitely, there's a lot of research to demonstrate that it's helpful, not just for mitochondrial function, but also for sleep quality metrics. There's even some research being done talking about mood improvement. Now, I don't suffer from anxiety or depression, but I've had plenty of clients and patients who have said, oh gosh, as a side effect, while I'm taking creatine, my sleep is better. And my view of the world is better. And then kind of tying it into Inositol, which is a really cool product because it's a very gentle way of addressing insulin resistance. So it's great. If you look at the research, PCOS, metabolic syndrome, very safe to take, helpful for insulin sensitivity, but it's also helpful for sleep architecture. So again, I go back to the sleep piece, helpful for getting you to fall asleep and stay asleep. If you wake up, you can fall asleep more easily. And then I just did a podcast that's not out yet, and we were talking about the mental health benefits of Inositol. And there's great research on OCD, PTSD, anxiety, depression, etc. Really, really helpful. And so for me, the supplements, and my third one will be announced shortly. My supplements are all focused on cognition and brain health, muscle health, and metabolic health. And so, and then also, finding products that are well-researched, because that was very important, safe. There's a lot of research now on other insulin sensitizing agents like berberine, chromium picolinate. And I think of berberine is fine if someone's taking it as needed, or you're taking it in conjunction with your healthcare practitioner. But I see a lot of berberine abuse. Berberine is a potent antimicrobial. There's even a mutual friend of ours who took berberine, ended up in the hospital because it put her in metabolic alkalosis. So to me, I'd rather address insulin sensitivity with a hammer and not a sledgehammer. And so I look at it as Inositol is much more gentle. And for a lot of my patients, it's really been in many ways life-changing. And in fact, when we were coming out with options to put in the supplement line, I had to laugh because I kept saying, I don't know how I'm going to market these. And like, they've done so well that it's high quality supplements that people find accessible. And it's like, okay, the science is sound. These are things I found really beneficial. I don't believe in people taking like hundreds of supplements a day. I think try to find things, pare them down, things that have multiple uses. Like this is going to help with sleep. This is going to help with insulin sensitivity. Those are beneficial, as opposed to, and I know we have similar training, and sometimes people in our space will have people on like 30 supplements. And I'm like, well, if it's for a month, that's one thing, but like the rest of your life, people get supplement fatigue. They get tired of taking so many things. So I try to make sure that anything I'm introducing is multi-use, that it'll have multiple benefits. And the cool thing is that it's not just for women, it can also be very helpful for men, but creatine in particular, because I had tried multiple brands that were already on the market and you couldn't figure out where they were sourced from. They were mixed in with other things. Like I am a huge advocate of if I can manage an unflavored supplement, I'd prefer that. And I think there's supplement companies out there doing great work, but they just want to flavor everything. And then I'm like, yuck, I don't want monk fruit in my stuff. I just don't want it. And so they blend seamlessly, and that just makes it easy. Like creatine, as an example, I just put in water and squeeze some lemon, and it's completely blends seamlessly. It's really easy to do. But yeah, those are two supplements I find helpful. I'm happy to talk about more things that I find like women of a certain age really benefit from. But if I can get them sleeping, I can get them exercising. If I can get them exercising, then I can get them focused on, maintaining and building muscle, and then, the protein piece as well. So very, what I consider to be simple, concise recommendations that we can make that really have a lot of net benefit systemically.
Yeah, for sure. I'm always trying to get less is more on the supplements and get real food and get it, be able to digest things properly, improve gut health. But sometimes we have to do a 3 to 4 months protocol to heal everything, and then ideally not have to take so many supplements. But getting something that creates more bang for a buck, that you're getting something as that to improve sleep, improve workout performance. But I know for myself and most everybody, sleep, if you don't get good sleep, the whole day is kind of shot. Your workout's crappy. Your food choices might not be as great. You just are kind of moody and grumpy, and you just don't want to do anything. You're unproductive at work. It's just when you've had bad sleep, like I had with my adrenal, air quotes, exhaustion. I just had that first year was just miserable. That 2 a.m. wake up, you can't fall asleep and you're just tired all the time and depressed. But then sleep, whatever you can do to improve sleep, I'm all aboard. Just everything else will get better if you just have really good sleep.
Yeah, no. And it's funny. I actually have had so many people ask me like, because I talk about my sleep stack, but I say that and I don't really tell people what's in it. But I've been saying, I need to do a webinar just to talk about that, not because I'm trying to sell anyone anything, just to say, like, these are the things that if you look at the research are very helpful. Maybe this is something you just use once in a while when you're feeling a little more stressed. Maybe this is something you use, like, as an example, Cerephos, which I'm sure both of us are familiar with. I use, like, if I feel like I have a heightened stress response, either because you got bad news or sometimes I'm yelling at my teenagers, which is common right now because we're just in the throes of teenage years. Sometimes I'll take a Cerephos, and we know that helps blunt that cortisol response. It's not harming your body in any way, but some things I just use as needed, and others I use every night. And I always say, like, when I travel, like, the sleep stack stuff is in my handbag on the plane because there's no way I'm going to be separated from it. It's like not going to happen.
Yeah. And I think, figuring that out and the timing, would you take that Inositol before bed an hour beforehand in tea, or do you like stack it with the sleepy time tea, or just put it in hot water? Or just water?
I stack things because I'm like in my mind, I'm like, I want to be efficient. So for me, I stick my Inositol into water. And so I'm sipping on so I always take magnesium L-threonate, and there's a powder by Zymogen that I think is phenomenal. And on my list that's going to come to fruition, we're going to have a powder magnesium L-threonate that will come out with MD Logic, but not yet. It's like you can only do things only so quickly. So I take a powdered magnesium L-threonate along with my Inositol, and that's when I'll take my sleep supplements. And there's one particular thing I can only take right before I go to bed, and that's my compounded progesterone because it works really fast. And so for me, the joke is I have to be like brushing my teeth and then going to bed. That's the only way I can take it. But most other things are just calming that autonomic nervous system, kind of saying, okay, it's time to go to bed. We've got our blue blockers on. We're reading a real book. We're not in front of a screen. Those things for me are really helpful. But yeah, I'm a huge advocate of like putting a powder in water. I'm drinking water up until bedtime because for whatever reason I sleep soundly enough that I don't wake up to have to pee. Thank goodness. Otherwise,
That's a cool
I know I'm an anomaly. But most of my patients, I tell them, like, limit your water intake after 6 if you're waking up at night to pee, because there are people that stop they're not as good with their antidiuretic hormone. Some people are mouth breathers, and that'll actually impact their body's ability to secrete ADH. And if they're not secreting enough ADH, they'll get up at night to pee because they have not concentrated their urine. That's why your urine, when you get up in the morning, is so dark, because your body is concentrating it so you don't have to wake up.
That'd be great. I just think not to wake up at night. Like, I don't wake up too much, but at least once, sometimes twice. But it's like, just sleep in, just wake up when it's morning. That'd be great.
I know. No, and I think we take that for granted until we have a problem. Like I tell people all the time, progesterone oftentimes helps us fall asleep. Estrogen oftentimes will help us stay asleep. So if you're at the beginning stages of perimenopause, maybe in the middle of perimenopause, sometimes just taking progesterone the week preceding your menstrual cycle can help with sleep, especially if you're having more anxiety, more depression symptoms. This is when women oftentimes get stuck on antidepressants or anti-anxiety agents, and really what they need is some progesterone.
Yeah.
And then, menopausal women, I'm like, I don't know how you sleep without progesterone. It's like it's one of my favorite things in the world. Like I always say, they'd have to pry that from my dead hands. Like that's how much it makes a difference in my sleep quality. And I take that 6 days a week. One night I give my body a break.
That's funny. Okay. So let's head back to creatine, because I know we all want to I would think I want to get stronger always and get leaner and be able to lift more weights, and just always hate the excuse that, I'm getting older, I can't lose that fat. But it's using some things we need little support with when I'm doing my 3 to 5 repetitions, lifting weights 3-4 days a week. But to enhance that process, what have you found good protocols for people trying to get stronger using creatine?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, women are unique. We have 70 to 80% less endogenous stores of creatine, which means the way that our physiology is designed, we can't get enough from our food. Because that's always what I hear. I'm just going to eat more steak. I'm like, that's great. The steak is important, but that's not going to replete what we've already lost. And we know based on research, and I'm happy to share these articles with you, when we really look at the research on women, we have differing needs throughout our menstrual cycle. We have differing needs in menopause and perimenopause. And so understanding that irrespective of what life stage we are in, we benefit from creatine monohydrate repletion. Now, when we're looking at the average woman who eats meat and eats animal-based protein, it's 3 grams a day. You don't have to do a loading dose of creatine. If you are vegetarian or vegan or a man, you need 5 grams a day. And even that's not a lot. Like when you look at the studies that were done where men were gaining like 10 pounds of water weight, and they were using exogenous, steroids, they were doing loading doses of like 20 grams. And if you understand the word creatine monohydrate, guess what it does? It hydrates those muscles. So you can have the propensity, although it is water weight, if you consume too much of it or this huge loading dose, that you could gain some weight, but it is again water weight. And so I like for women, if they are fasting, if not, you can take it around when you're exercising, to consume it in a feeding window, because creatine is like an amino acid. So it's very, very helpful to consume it around food or around your workouts, depending on what's most convenient for you. If you take a high quality product, it can blend seamlessly into your water. So if it's easier for you to take it while you're exercising and you're not someone that's doing intermittent fasting, I think that's great. One of the questions I get asked all the time is, does it break my fast? And I say, technically, yes. So take it in your feeding window. So I think it really depends, but there's solid research, and there's certainly, research. There's something that Alan Aragon was just talking about on social media. I didn't have an opportunity to catch up, but I will be doing that today. Because much like I'm sure it is for you, it's like you'll see a paper circulating and it's getting a lot of buzz, and you're trying to figure out what's the end result. The paper wasn't looking at women. So I think that's always kind of, we sometimes we don't always get the research that we deserve to have, because they like to do it on rodent models, animal models, and menopausal obese women, and like everyone else is in between. So I always say, like, what does the research say? What is applicable to us? And I think understanding that we just don't make enough of it inside our bodies, so endogenously, that it makes it a worthwhile supplement to consider. And certainly for those of us, like, sarcopenia is a real thing. Muscle loss with aging is a real thing. And it's not that you're not working hard enough or you're not eating properly, but it is a normal catabolic process that occurs in our muscles. It accelerates after 40. Each decade, we lose more muscle mass. And for many women in like their early 40s, they're like, I'm not that hungry anymore. A lot of that can be a byproduct of this loss of metabolic flexibility and just shifts in estrogen and progesterone levels that can impact our ability to, really mitigate food choices and how we're feeling. So definitely one to consider, and certainly one that's been well researched enough that it's not bro science. I actually, admittedly, when it first went on my radar, I was like, I don't know, because I think of it as bro science. It's real science, so it's not just bro science, but definitely impressive. And I can't think of anyone that doesn't want to maintain what they have, or at least build more of what they have. And for me, it's funny. I have a friend who's a clinical psychologist who's in her early 70s, and she's like 90 pounds. She's this little itty bitty thing. And she was leg pressing like over 300 pounds. And she's been taking creatine, which is insane because it's 3 times her body weight, right? How many people can say that? And so she was saying, like, for her, and she was a former vegan, she was like, now I know better. She eats lots of meat, but she's still a little person. She says all the time, like, creatine for her has been so helpful for her to be able to build muscle, because she's like, I'm a menopausal woman. Like, I'm 20 years into menopause. I'm like long into menopause. And, I'm watching her do a video. Her daughter was recording this video, and I was like, that is phenomenal. Like, I love seeing that. It gives me hope. It gives me hope that we can all end up, remaining metabolically, physically active and healthy throughout our lifetimes.
Yeah, I did a podcast with my friend Lanita, who is here, teaches spin class, and she's one of the track cyclists. She's 67 years old somehow. Wow. I don't know how. She on the leg press at the gym, like, she had 4 plates on each side. And she's a small person, but she's got pow legs and so strong and powerful, because velodrome cycling is, all out sprint. So it's all power, but she's an amazing endurance athlete too. But I'm like, what? So that she does all the short, intense interval sprints that we talk about for aging and doing the heavy weightlifting. But like, how do you get that much strength? Because I can lift like 10 pounds on my leg strength right now. It's my area of opportunity. But I think it is trying to figure out how to get stronger and leaner and, for athletic performance. But I know I don't like, having the arms and having like extra grabbage, and that's just me, but I want to be lean and strong as I age.
Yeah, no. And I think the other thing that's important to talk about is to not fear hormone replacement therapy, because for a lot of women, they may start with a little bit of progesterone. As I mentioned, maybe they do it in their luteal phase the week before they get their menstrual cycle. And then, what's interesting about perimenopause, if you look at the research, we have sometimes the wildest fluctuations in estrogen at that stage of our lives. So 10 to 15 years preceding menopause than any other time in our lives. And so you could have super high estradiol levels, and then they're low the next month. And it's just kind of this up and down. Oftentimes you're estrogen dominant, just relative to low estrogen. And then obviously estrogen just kind of, as you're getting closer to menopause, it just finally just drops off a cliff, and testosterone kind of goes down a little more slowly. But I find for a lot of people, those changes in our skin and our skin turgor are really a byproduct of those loss of not only estradiol, which is the predominant form of estrogen, but also changes in progesterone and testosterone levels. And so understanding that sometimes the way to counteract that, along with everything else, like if you're doing all the other lifestyle things, is understanding there's absolutely no shame in taking hormone replacement therapy, not so that it's super therapeutic levels. In fact, I was liking something that was done by a physician on Instagram today, talking about pellet therapy, which I'm not a proponent of. And I'm starting to see more and more younger women that are on very high doses of testosterone, and they're having heart attacks. In fact, I went to a book signing last week with a physician, and she was saying, they're seeing 35, 40-year-olds that are getting very, very super physiologic, meaning way beyond the values that your body could make on its own because of pellet therapy, or they're getting injectable testosterone that's giving them very super physiologic changes in their testosterone levels, and they're having some of the side effects. So understand there's a very safe space to be in if you require or would like to do HRT, but also understanding, like, I think it's important to talk about the fact that, as we are losing these sex hormones, and everyone's a little different. Some people may have a more precipitous drop and they may feel it. That may be the brain fog, people having terrible hot flashes, etc. But understanding that bone, brain, and heart health are instrumentally important to those sex hormones. So understanding your own risks and, based on who you are, I'm very much a believer in that you give women in information and you allow them to make an informed consent. Unlike all the years I was on oral contraceptives and no one ever told me what that would do to my bone health. And I'm now osteopenic at the stage of life I'm in. So one of the reasons why I started HRT was because I was doing all the other things and my bone mass was a little on the low side. And I knew that wasn't going to get better given the fact I was doing all the right things. So helping listeners understand if they feel comfortable and that's what they want to do, understanding that HRT can be very instrumental for substantive changes in the body that can mitigate a lot of the inflammation and oxidative stress, because Dr. Amy Killen talks about how menopause is a de facto state of inflammation, and it really is a disease state. And I think that's how we have to look at it in order to counsel women on next steps and things they can be doing to lessen the likelihood they'll have all the, the terrible sleep. Like, I think it's become the norm. Like, women gain 20 pounds, I'm going to put that in air quote, and they can't sleep and they feel terrible and they can't think straight. And a lot of it's a byproduct of these changes that are happening physiologically, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Mm-hmm. What about for men? Their own type of menopause. Have you ever, I know you focus on women's health, but have you, I would think same with men in a way that their testosterone, and we've talked to Tracy Gaplin, Dr. Gaplin, and I know testosterone is always a thing, but what do you find for men's hormones?
I think, so understand that andropause is less dramatic as menopause. So that's number one. So men don't they don't get shoved off a cliff and then all of a sudden they're dealing with low testosterone. I think when we're looking at how metabolically unhealthy the population is, it's like, okay, first, if you have insulin resistance, let's fix it, because that can lower testosterone. And then exposure to endocrine mimicking chemicals, which applies to both genders. It's not just unique to men. I do think that men can have optimized testosterone levels. And obviously this is Tracy's forte, but he and I are really good friends and we talk about this a lot. I think most men benefit from some support as well. And there's no shame in that. Like, I think there's this thought process that whether it's male or female, if you're taking hormone replacement therapy, that means you're not doing it naturally. And I think that this is a very personal decision. So there's no judgment when I say this, but I know I feel a whole lot better on HRT. So to me, there's no question it was the right decision for me. Although I'm super conservative. Like, for me, I'm like, I'd rather go low and slow and figure it out than someone give me really high doses of medication. But I do think for men, if you fix the lifestyle things and they're not insulin resistant and they're not metabolically inflexible, and they've, gotten as much endocrine mimicking chemicals out of their personal care products, environment, and food, I think doing TRT is certainly really reasonable. I mean, what you're starting to also see is some people are injecting growth hormone and all these other things. And I always say you have to be so careful with hormones, meaning you need to work with someone that knows what they're doing, because there's not like, you don't give one hormone and think it just impacts that hormone. It impacts all the hormones. And so much like, if someone has low thyroid can impact everything. And so just understanding that it's not a one size fits all, and working with someone that is going to listen to your symptoms and be respectful of what you want to do. But there's no food that's going to replace the testosterone. There's no food that's going to there's no food that's going to replace progesterone or estrogen or testosterone. And I love that people talk about this, because it all starts with food, but there's nothing that's going to replace the physiologic differences between providing a bioidentical hormone versus a food-based thing. And there's nothing wrong with saying like, oh, I want to support progesterone by eating these carbohydrate dense foods. That's fine. It's absolutely fine. But if you really want to move the needle, then doing bioidentical progesterone is completely fine. And that's different than progestin, which is a synthetic, just like pregnant mare's urine is a synthetic, and it really is made from horse's urine. It's very different than estradiol, which is the same type of hormone that our body makes naturally. I think that's an important kind of distinction to make, because I've had people say to me, oh yeah, I'm on oral contraceptives and I'm 54. I'm like, that's not hormone replacement therapy, people.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's just make sure that as long as that is not hormone replacement therapy, that is a synthetic endocrine disruptive chemical. And I feel comfortable saying that because I've had enough OBs now talk to me about that on my podcast. I'm like, it is an endocrine disruptor, just by byproduct of the way it works. And took oral contraceptives for years, as did many of us, for a variety of different reasons. So know better, do better, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's working with people that understand that and not just depend on your functional or traditional doctor. You need to go see a functional medicine doctor, naturopathic doctor, to figure out the why and what's imbalance and bring your body into balance.
Absolutely.
Because they won't help you. So
unless they're a wonderful unicorn, or you can go through the North American Menopause Society. They are current on HRT guidelines. You know, I think it was 2018. They came up to speed with the rest of the world. So you could potentially work with someone who is both allopathic, which is traditionally trained, and you know, kind of also knowledgeable about the new guidelines. I think that can be helpful, because the other piece is that I'm trying to be more cognizant of the fact that integrative medicine may not be financially feasible for everybody. So just kind of, I always say, like, I'll just put that little, I have no affiliation with them. I'll just kind of put that in there. If, you know, you're looking for someone close by, you can't find someone, that NAMS should be a good resource if you're a woman.
That's a good tip, because I think anything that's covered by insurance, is not everyone can afford anything. And, you know, getting comprehensive blood panel from your doctor is a challenge in itself. So whatever we can do first under insurance. So running out of time, but going back to creatine, post workout, have you experimented when the timing of it, if you're trying to get stronger for athletes?
Yeah, I think it's important. So I think it's a bit of a stimulus and response. So you have to lift heavy enough. And I know your listeners are certainly knowledgeable about that. I have to stress that over and over again with mine. Don't be using just, 5-pound hand weights. That's not what we're talking about. Lift heavy enough. So you need enough stimulus to help with that, making sure that first meal has at least 30 grams of protein to help with muscle protein synthesis. And that's probably the good time to use some creatine, because you can slip it into your water. Certainly my product it literally dissolves effortlessly, so it doesn't feel like crystalline. But I would say within if you're really trying to work on strength training, really, and increasing endurance and all of those kind of factors, I would say it's probably important in terms of nutrient timing. And obviously this is a good, I would plug you for saying, like, what is the definitive answer? Because that's not my area of expertise. But usually in a feeding window, along with some food, I think is very, very helpful in terms of making it efficacious. And you don't need a loading dose. I just want to keep reiterating that, because we get that question a lot. 3 grams a day if you eat animal-based protein and you're a female, 5 grams a day if you're vegan, vegetarian, or male. My teenagers take 5 grams a day and they love it. So, and it's safe for your teenagers, but make sure they're kind of in the puberty space. Don't give it to your 12-year-old.
Yeah. And more is not better, right? So don't just think it's so good for me, I'm going to take it 3 times a day, because that's what people do. Oh, that's good. I'm going to do that more and more and more.
My 15-year-old tried to tell me he was doing that. And I was like, Liam, there's a law of diminishing returns. And at some point you might have to say, like, time out. 5 grams a day is perfect. And that's what I'm going to stick with. And I said, that's what you should stick with. So a little bit of a re-education.
Awesome. All right. So where can people find you this year, 2023, where suddenly it's May? And
I know. It's like, where did the year go?
No kidding.
Yeah. So website is still a great place to find me. My podcast, Everyday Wellness. You can find my book, The Intermittent Fasting Transformation. I am active on Instagram. I have a private group on Facebook called Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle /my name. It is free. There are men and women in there. And then I'm also on Twitter. Be forewarned, I can be snarky. Sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, you're a totally different person there. I'm like, I am actually snarky, but it's never at the direction of I'd never to be hurtful. It's more, I'm just kind of tongue in cheek. But I'm active on all those platforms, and obviously hoping to get Debbie to come on as a podcast guest on Everyday Wellness later this year when I get caught up with myself. But it's a great place to connect, but the website's always a good place. You can connect everywhere off the website.
Okay. Well, I'll put all the links in the show notes and where people can buy the supplements and test them out and see if we all can get lean and strong this year and maximize that strength gains as the aging athlete, as I am striving to look my best the second half of my life.
That's right. It's important. It's important.
Yeah. Just the eye wrinkle area is what area of opportunity. Again, is whatever facial oil serums you can start doing and injections for the under eye. That's my biggest problem. So, all right, I'll let you go. Have an amazing day.
Thanks. You too.